Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to put together a little bit of a wish list for things in 3.18 in the absence of any significant news about the update. So first thing I wanted to put on the wish list is some source of Ultimatum unique availability. We've had confirmation that Ultimatum is being reworked but is not ready to be re-added to the game in 3.18. This means that some really cool unique items are Hateforge at the very high power end, Mahoxidal's Machination at the very cool end, but also some fun things like Relic of the Past that are less powerful. These items are some of the most imaginative and interesting uniques in the game, and they're just flat out not available at all in temporary leagues. Now, there's a bit of a precedent for GGG adding a temporary solution for something like this. Back when Delve League came out, Incursion and Bestiary were being reworked with an intention of re-adding them to the game, which happened in the league after Delve. Those two leagues had some cool uniques in them, Farrell's Fur being one of them from the Bestiary mechanics, and from Incursion you had things like Zerfy's Heart, which was much more popular back then than it is now. These were added via the use of a Reliquary key, which was made available only in the Delve League, and that could drop any unique item that was league exclusive, and apparently I believe they could drop with equal rarity. So this meant that if you got one of these Reliquary keys, it was about 1 in 150 to be a Headhunter, and it was about 1 in 150 to be a Berrick's Pass. But of course, this then meant that there were Zerfy's Hearts in the league, there were Farrell's Furs in the league, you get all of these items and you could play around with them. It was very clear at the time that these were added that this was a temporary solution, and when the Delve League ended, these keys were removed from the game. So that would be one option for Ultimatum uniques. Alternatively, they could just be given a temporary drop location. Personally, I'd like to see them added to Maven's invitations, but I'm not completely set on that. Maybe anywhere else. Even just make them temporarily into the drop anywhere pool, that would solve the problem too. Second thing I wanted to point out is that Fortify needs some overhauling. I like the changes that they did to Fortify, except the numbers are completely wrong on them. So fortification stacks are currently not available at all when you're fighting monsters with extremely high ailment threshold. This can either be direct ailment threshold, so for instance the Shaper has a really high ailment threshold and so it's very hard to get Fortify on him unless you are at the 0.2 Shapers per second level of DPS. Or it's also the case if you're fighting monsters with extremely high damage reduction, such as monsters in heavily delirious maps. So my proposed solution here is that if a monster has more ailment threshold than Igna Phoenix would at the same level, Igna Phoenix being one of the rogue exiles, then for the purposes of Fortify calculation only, the ailment threshold is treated as being equal to that Igna Phoenix would have in that map. So Igna Phoenix's hit points are 2.6 million, and so is her ailment threshold in a tier 16 map. In a tier 17 map, like the Shaper's Realm, it'd be about 3 million, and so that would be her ailment threshold. That would be the Shaper's ailment threshold would just be treated as 3 million for the purposes of Fortify calculations. For everything else, like for inflicting freezes, it would still be in the 10 million plus range, but for the purposes of Fortify, it'd be lower, and therefore you would be able to get your Fortify stacks. This may create a situation where spellcasters can use counterattacks to get Fortify, and if that's the case, then that should just be reassessed and maybe make a situation where casters lose stacks. The third thing I wanted to suggest is adding new sources for Heist loot. Every league has some exclusive loot you almost can't get from any other sources. As an example, Ritual has Blizzard Crown bases and has a couple of uniques. The problem is that Heist just has too many of these. This makes it feel mandatory. Now, I personally like Heist content. I'm fine with running Heist content. But some people don't like it, and it ends up being something that they're pushed into running whether they want to or not. As well as this, some of the Heist exclusive drops are incredibly rare. Far rarer than other league exclusive uniques. So my proposed solution here is to keep Dying Anguish as it currently is. It's in a very good map, it's in Promenade, and it's something that is solving this problem just for alternate quality gems. And then secondly, give Maven's Invitation the Atlas a modest chance to drop a Heist Curio reward. And just for some ballpark figures here as numbers, as sort of drop rates. Now this would assume a rare invitation for the Atlas, 5% chance to get a replica unique, 5% to get an experimented base, 5% to get an enchanted chest, 5% to get an enchanted weapon, and 5% to get an alternate quality gem. With those numbers, there is no question that the best source for Heist loot is running Heist, as it should be. When you run a blueprint, for instance, you would be able to pick between 5 items in each of your wings, and whereas when you run Maven's Invitation the Atlas, you just get what you're given. However, it would mean that there's still a lot more of these items in circulation. Heist would remain the only place to get trinkets and remain the only place to get curio replacement unique items. Everything else would have another drop somewhere else in the game, but Heist would be the best place for them. My next proposal is to adjust stacked decks. So stacked decks have a huge impact on the trade league economy in the first 96 hours of a league. Most first boss kills come from access tokens that are gained through stacked decks. So for instance, Maze of the Minotaur maps that are sourced from divination cards that come from stacked decks. Likewise, this is the case for most of the first boss uniques, and most of the first top crafting bases also start their life as a stacked deck. So my solution here is that stacked decks are somewhat throttled in the first 96 hours of a league. So after 96 hours, they work as they do now. But for that first 96 hours, they cannot generate any card that hasn't been generated in-game at least 10 times via normal means. So for instance, until there's been a bunch of kills of all the Crystal King, the divination card that he drops, Luminous Trove, will just not be in the stack deck pool. But once you're 4 days into the league, this restriction is removed. This preserves the functionality of stack decks mid-league and late league where they're fun, but it stops them from being so dominant in the very, very early days of a league. My next proposed change is a rotation of the unique maps that are on the Atlas of Worlds. So since the Atlas's inception in patch 2.4, the amount of changes that have happened to the unique maps that are on it has been very, very small. All the Grandmasters and Perandus Manor were removed, Doriani's Machinarium was added. That's basically it. It means that things like Beachhead have never had a chance to shine. The 4 lesser synthesis maps have never been on it. And also any new maps that are added, and I'm going to propose some new maps when we get to the Archnemesis section, that they don't get a chance to shine either. So my solution here is that change is as good as a holiday. Shake them up a little. Just remove 5 unique maps that are currently on the Atlas from it and replace them with 5 others. That said, I do think it's best to keep Hall of the Grandmasters off the Atlas though. Hall of the Grandmasters was always a pretty nasty map, but it's gotten a lot worse in the last couple of patches, and it's something that a very, very, very tiny percentage of the player base can beat. It's considerably harder to beat than Maven's Invitation the Fiat at the moment. I do think that having Hall of the Grandmasters gating anything related to the Atlas would be a bad idea now. Okay, so the next one is give us a reason to equip non-crystallized omniscience amulets. So there are some builds, obviously, that can't use crystallized omniscience. There's no way you're going to use this on a skeleton build. But for everything else, crystallized omniscience has obsoleted all rares and all former chase uniques on builds that can use it. Leadership's Price, all Natal's Vow, all's Uprising, +2 rare amulets. None of these are worth even considering on elemental builds that scale hit damage. Making Omniscience rarer doesn't change this. Even if it's raised to Savior rarity, and I believe the Savior to be the rarest of the boss-specific drop uniques, the Savior is rarer than, for instance, All's Uprising with Grace mod on it. Even if it's made that rarity, I don't think that's going to solve anything. Unless it's put at a rarity that is akin to specific 2 or 3 mod combinations on Watcher's Eyes or Precursor's Emblems, at which point it practically doesn't exist. And in that sense, you have a reason to equip non-crystallized Omniscience amulets because you have made an assessment that you cannot get this multiple mirror amulet. In the same way that people equip non-Mage Blood belts. I think that not nerfing Crystallized Omniscience is going to be a big mistake. It's going to mean that the League meta is going to be solved on day 1. And I would like to see a reason to equip amulets like Ulnatal's Vow or Strangle Grasp. You know, really good items that have no place in the meta at the moment. Next suggestion is a limited future for Archnemesis. I like the fights in Archnemesis. I hated the inventory Tetris games. And I think that GGG should keep the former and ditch the latter. So remove Archnemesis entirely from rollable maps. No Archnemesis inventory, no 8% chance for it to appear in maps. But then add 2 unique maps that are dedicated to the system. One of these would drop like candy. So think Worm's Malt tier rarity, and would have 4 Archnemesis encounters with low tier Archnemesis. So these would be encounters that you would be able to get some reasonable amount of loot from, but it's mostly there as a way that people that actively enjoy Archnemesis gameplay could still engage with the system. At each of the 4 pillars, you could choose between 3 Archnemesis mods, and none of these would be particularly special. So, you know, you're not going to get Treants here, you're not going to get Katava, you're not going to get Innocence, but you might sometimes see Solaris as an option, but mostly you're going to see lower tier stuff. The other map then could be much rarer and much better. So if it was made, say, Chevron's Wrappings tier, it could have 6 Archnemesis in it and having 2 guaranteed between Innocence, Katava, and Treants. So you knew that you were going to get a lot of loot every time you run this map. It would be a genuine reward. This could be a drop anywhere tier 2 rarity unique. It'd be something that'd be really cool when it drops. and these could be on or off the Atlas in any given league. It doesn't really matter. They're going to be worth running anyway, whether they're on the Atlas or not. Next up, I want to see a reason to play Juggernaut. Juggernaut is worse offensively than Champion as it should be, but it's worse defensively than Champion as well. 30% aura effect and free defiance banner roughly matches all of the Juggernaut's endurance charge based defenses, but Champion gets more than that and Juggernaut does not. So Champion gets the taunt based defenses, Champion gets Fortify. So my proposed solution here is to give all of the Juggernaut notables some amount of flat hit points and to add a few sources outside the Ascendancy of damage scaling that's based on endurance charges. Now these exist in the game at the moment, but they mostly give fire damage, and fire damage is probably the weakest type of damage because it can't inflict freeze, it can't inflict chill, and as a result I think that these mods, even though in magnitude they're comparable to the amount of cold damage per frenzy charge that you can get, that ends up being quite a lot worse. So for that reason, maybe consider scaling up those sources of fire damage per endurance charge. That might be an option. Or just do something else that makes Juggernaut have a little bit more damage when it's got its endurance charges rolling. So second to last, I want to suggest bringing back a couple of Path of Exile's iconic uniques from the past that ended up being nerfed for quite good reasons at the time. I'm talking about Calm's Heart and Loreweave specifically here, although there may be other items that people can think of as well. Calm's Heart was nerfed because it was so much better than any other chest in the game at the time, but that was at a time when chess pieces basically couldn't roll any offensive mods at all. It was all armor, flat life, and resistances. That was all you could roll, and Calm's Heart came along with 1,000 maximum life, and people were like, oh, well, that's just better than everything else, despite having a big drawback. It was also a time when cast when damage taken didn't exist, and as a result, you had less pressure on your sockets. Then the game changed. Calm's Heart was nerfed because it was so overwhelmingly powerful. But since then, we've seen influence mods. We've seen things like the Guazzaliti Incursion Life mod. We've seen all of the Grasping Mail chests that have been dominant in 3.17, and a whole lot of other options like more powerful unique chests such as the Brass Dome. Ultimately, I know that Calm's Heart, as it currently stands in the game, has no place in the game. I honestly don't think that Calm's Heart original version would be all that powerful now, but it would be at least compelling to try to use, and I think people would use it. We'd see people equipping it, and then making a decision after a while, yeah, maybe that's not the right item anymore, but still it's cool to try around with. For that reason, I think Calm's Heart would be perfectly fine to restore to its original pre-nerf stats of 1,000 life. It does make it tier 1 rarity so that it's a bit rarer than it is currently. I think tier 1 would be about 4 times as rare as its current tier 2. Just restore its past glory and you would see this item being interesting again, exciting again. The other one would be Loreweave. Loreweave is something that you can deterministically farm yourself, which is a big positive. And it has the last line, your maximum resistances are X. Now, when Loreweave was first introduced, that was 76 to 80%. At the present time, it is 76 to 78% after the nerfs that took place to Loreweave. The reason for those nerfs was that Loreweave was crowding out rare chests. It wasn't really plausible to get a rare chest that was better than Loreweave. However, that has definitely changed, especially with the introduction of the Awakener's Orb in 3.9, and then with both Eldritch Crafting and Maven Orbs and the like, you can get far better than an original Loreweave now. And as a result, I think it would be fine to bring back the old glory of Loreweave, restore that to 76 to 80%, and let people roll the 80% on it. The other thing is that it's a lot easier to increase maximum resistances through other means as well now. And so that's another reason that Loreweave would be less powerful than it used to be. It'd still be a pretty good item, and I think a lot of people would chase it down in week 1, but then they would outgrow it later in the league, which is the ideal spot for a unique item like it. There's a couple of others that you could consider as well. There's the unique gloves from Abyss. Tomb Fist would be another thing that has been nerfed. The nerf was justified, it was needed at the time because they were such a dominant item, but nowadays I don't think that an original Tomb Fist would be all that good anymore. So there's other ones, but these are the two that I wanted to suggest. And last, a reason to play Trickster. This one I think is a lot harder to fix, as Trickster's identity as Master of Damage Over Time is shared with many other ascendancies. So if you want to play a damage over time build, there are compelling reasons to consider any of the following ascendancies. You play a Pathfinder, you could play a Raider, you could play an Occultist, you could play an Inquisitor, you play an Elementalist, you could play a Chieftain. All that numbers buffs are going to do is going to result in Trickster DOT builds gaining at the expense of those other builds. I think ultimately there are too many DOT master type ascendancies at the moment. For that reason, I think Trickster needs a completely new identity. So I had an idea for a different identity for Trickster that I proposed a few months back in a different video, which I'll link below, that played up Harness the Void and made Trickster an elemental conversion ascendancy. And then the Trickster concept then is conveyed through you not knowing what sort of damage to brace for. That was my idea, but I'm not wedded to it. It just needs a new identity. That's the main thing. That's all I got though. May your Valobs have interesting results, and I will see you around.